The scent of cinnamon and burnt sugar still clings to my memory of before. Before Richard, before them, before everything turned inside out. Mom used to bake apple pies every Sunday, the aroma filling our little two-story house, a warm, comforting blanket against the world. Dad would be in the living room, tinkering with something mechanical, his brow furrowed in concentration, but a smile always ready for me. I was 11, blissfully ignorant, cocooned in the belief that this ordinary life was permanent. "Tasha, honey, can you set the table?" Mom would call, her voice carrying a lilt that's now a phantom echo. I'd scamper into the dining room, placing the floral-patterned plates, forks glinting under the soft light of the chandelier, a chandelier that felt grand back then, though I know now it was probably cheap, mass-produced. It was ours, though. It held our light. The divorce felt like a slow-motion train wreck. No screaming, no shattered dishes, just a quiet, insidious erosion. Dad packed his toolbox and his well-worn leather jacket, hugged me so tight I could barely breathe, and whispered, "I'll always be your compass, princess, no matter what." His words were supposed to be a promise, a lifeline, but even compasses can't navigate a storm this big. Mom initially put on a brave face, a brittle facade that cracked a little more each day. The alimony checks were a point of quiet resentment, a low hum of discontent that vibrated through the house. "It's never enough, Tasha," she'd mutter, staring at the figures on the check. Never enough. Weekends with Dad were a sanctuary, a temporary escape from the growing chill at home. His apartment above the auto repair shop reeked of oil and coffee, a pungent mix that somehow smelled like love. He was building his business from the ground up, working tirelessly, his hands always stained with grease. I'd sit in the corner, drawing in my sketchbook, breathing in the comforting fumes, pretending the world outside didn't exist. Then Richard arrived, a polished, confident presence who swept into Mom's life like a carefully orchestrated hurricane. He had 2 daughters, Sarah and Emma, a pair of carbon copies with matching blonde hair and icy blue eyes, a pair of predators in designer clothes. "Tasha, honey, I have wonderful news," Mom said, her voice trembling with a hope I now recognize as desperation. She clasped my hands, her grip too tight. "Richard asked me to marry him. And you'll have sisters. Won't that be wonderful?" Sisters? The word sounded like a fairy tale, a dream I'd nurtured since I was a little girl. Mom painted a picture of idyllic family dinners, slumber parties, shared secrets. I was blinded by the glitter, seduced by the illusion of belonging. "They're so sweet, Tasha," she gushed. "You'll just adore them." I remember nodding eagerly, my heart overflowing with a naive optimism that now makes me want to scream. I wanted to believe. I needed to believe. The wedding was small, but Mom was radiant, her eyes shining with a light I hadn't seen in years. I wore a pale blue dress, feeling awkward and out of place. Sarah and Emma were miniature versions of Richard, their faces fixed in practiced smiles. They whispered and giggled throughout the ceremony, their eyes darting to mine, then quickly away, as if I were something unpleasant they'd accidentally stepped in. When they moved in, the house felt smaller, suffocated. I tried to be welcoming, to embrace the fantasy Mom had spun. I cleaned my room, made space in the bathroom, even crafted handmade welcome cards adorned with glitter and childish drawings. "See? You're already being such a good sister," Mom said, kissing my forehead. "I knew you'd all get along. If only she knew. If only I knew." The happy ending was a lie, a cruel joke waiting to be unleashed. The honeymoon was over before it even began. It took precisely 72 hours for the fairy tale to dissolve, leaving behind the bitter taste of ash and regret. On the 4th morning, I woke up early, as usual, ready to face the day. But when I reached the bathroom, the door was locked. "Just a minute." Sarah's voice chirped from inside, dripping with saccharine sweetness. That minute stretched into 45. I knocked, pleading, explaining I needed to get ready for school. But all I heard was giggling and the roar of the hairdryer. Finally, the door swung open, revealing Sarah and Emma, perfectly preened, their blonde hair gleaming, their makeup flawlessly applied. They wore matching outfits, a coordinated display of dominance. "Beauty takes time," Emma drawled, her eyes sweeping over me with disdain. "You should know that." "Oh wait, maybe you don't." I barely had time to brush my teeth before the school bus screeched to a halt outside. That became the new normal. They monopolized the bathroom, leaving me scrambling, rushing, constantly late. My meticulously planned mornings were a casualty of their calculated cruelty. But the bathroom was just the tip of the iceberg. The subtle, insidious campaign to erase me from my own life had begun. At dinner that night, I reached for my usual seat next to Mom, but Sarah was already there, her arm possessively draped over the back of the chair. "Tasha, honey, why don't you sit over there?" Mom said, her voice strangely distant. She pointed to the chair farthest from her, at the edge of the table, practically in the hallway. "It's just a chair, don't make a fuss." I watched, my stomach twisting as Mom catered to Sarah and Emma, cutting their meat into perfect pieces, refilling their drinks, showering them with the attention she used to lavish on me. Richard beamed at the scene, a smug satisfaction radiating from him. I picked at my food, the flavors turning to dust in my mouth. Then, Sarah spotted my collection of hair accessories, the brightly colored clips and headbands. Mom and I had painstakingly chosen together during our weekly shopping trips. My treasures. "Oh my God, Emma, look at these," Sarah exclaimed, grabbing the container. "They'd look so much better on us." "Those are mine," I said, my voice trembling. I reached for the container, but Sarah pulled it away. "Girls should share," Mom said, her tone firm. "Tasha, don't be greedy. Sarah and Emma are your sisters now." Greedy. The word hung in the air like a curse. After that, Sarah and Emma weaponized it, whispering it behind my back whenever adults weren't listening. "Greedy Tasha," they'd hiss, their eyes glinting with malicious glee. But whispering wasn't enough. They needed more. My textbook started appearing with torn pages. My clothes were mysteriously stained with nail polish. My homework vanished, only to resurface crumpled in the trash. Each incident chipped away at my spirit, leaving me raw and vulnerable. Each incident was followed by the same maddening refrain, "Tasha, stop trying to get attention," Mom would say, shaking her head with weary exasperation. "I know this adjustment is hard, but making up stories about your sisters isn't the way to handle it." "They're not my sisters," I finally snapped, my voice cracking with desperation. It was after I discovered my favorite sweater, a soft, hand-knitted thing Mom had made for me, with a gaping hole ripped through the front. It was the last straw. That outburst earned me a lecture from both Mom and Richard about family values, gratitude, and the importance of getting along. The words washed over me, hollow and meaningless. But the final blow came a week later, delivered with a smile and a casual shrug. "Honey, we're reorganizing the bedrooms," Mom announced, her eyes sliding away from mine. "Sarah and Emma need more space for their things. Your room has better closets, so they'll take that one. We've already moved your stuff to the small room next to the laundry." The small room. It was basically a glorified storage closet, barely big enough for a bed and a dresser. A prison cell disguised as a bedroom. When I saw my belongings crammed into that tiny space, something inside me broke. It wasn't just about the room. It was about my place in this family, or rather, my complete and utter lack of one. It was a declaration. You don't belong here. Richard wasn't content with simply allowing his daughters to torment me. He had to actively participate, adding his own brand of insidious cruelty to the mix. Every minor transgression, every perceived flaw was magnified, twisted into evidence that I was a difficult, ungrateful child. If I was quiet, I was sulking. If I spoke up, I was being disruptive. There was no winning. There was only surviving. "Just like your father," he'd say, shaking his head, his eyes filled with a false pity. always causing problems. The apple doesn't fall far from the tree, does it? The funny thing was, Dad was doing well. His auto repair business, initially a struggling endeavor, was slowly gaining traction. He specialized in luxury cars, and his reputation for meticulous work and unwavering honesty was spreading. I never told Richard this, of course. I let him cling to his preconceived notions, his pathetic attempts to diminish Dad. It was a small act of rebellion, a secret weapon in my arsenal of survival. Weekends with Dad became my lifeline, my refuge from the storm. We'd order pizza, watch old movies, and he'd tell me stories about the fancy cars he was working on. Sometimes I'd just sit in his office while he did paperwork, soaking in the quiet, the peace, the feeling of unconditional love. "How are things at home, Princess?" he'd ask occasionally, his brow furrowed with concern. And I'd always say, "Fine." He had enough on his plate, juggling long hours and the constant pressures of running a business. The last thing he needed was to worry about me too. I was a master of deflection, a skilled practitioner of the art of pretending. The years crawled by, each one a carbon copy of the last. I threw myself into my studies, spending as much time as possible at the library, burying myself in books, escaping into worlds where families weren't fractured, where love wasn't conditional. I found solace in friendships, clinging to the few genuine connections I managed to forge. Anything to avoid being home, to delay the inevitable return to that toxic environment. Before I knew it, high school graduation was looming. I'd applied to several colleges, driven by a desperate desire to escape, to create a new life, a life free from the shadows of Richard and his daughters. The acceptance letters started arriving, each one a beacon of hope, a promise of a brighter future. I was ecstatic, giddy with anticipation. Finally, a chance to breathe, to become myself, to leave the wreckage behind. The day after graduation, I couldn't contain my excitement any longer. I had to share my news, to finally break free from the suffocating silence. We were all sitting at the dinner table, the usual cast of characters in their designated roles. Richard, radiating smugness. Sarah and Emma, their eyes glinting with bored disdain. Mom, her face etched with a perpetual weariness. I took a deep breath, steeling myself for the inevitable resistance. "I got accepted to several colleges," I announced, my voice trembling slightly. I pulled out the acceptance letters, a tangible representation of my hard work, my ambition. I even got offered some partial scholarships. I really like the business program at. Richard's laugh cut through my words like a shard of ice. It wasn't a genuine laugh, not a sound of joy or amusement. It was a mocking, condescending sound that made my stomach churn. "College?" he sneered, his eyes narrowing. "And who exactly is going to pay for that? Your loser father? The guy who can barely keep his little garage afloat?" The letter suddenly felt heavy in my hands, a burden instead of a promise. My carefully constructed bubble of hope began to deflate. "I have scholarships, and I can get loans," I stammered, trying to salvage the moment. "Don't be ridiculous," he interrupted, his voice sharp. "We're not co-signing any loans for you. We're saving our money for Sarah and Emma's education. Their future is what matters." I turned to Mom, desperately searching for a flicker of support, a sign that she still saw me, still cared. But she just looked down at her plate, her face impassive. "Richard's right, honey," she said softly, her voice barely audible. "We need to think about the girl's future." Something inside me snapped. All the hurt, all the rejection, all the years of being pushed aside, it all came pouring out at once. A tidal wave of pent-up rage and sorrow. "You haven't paid any attention to me in years," I shouted, pushing back from the table, my chair scraping against the floor. "All you care about is pleasing your precious husband and his perfect daughters. When's the last time you even asked how I was doing? When's the last time you acted like my mother instead of their stepmother?" The silence that followed was deafening, a thick, suffocating blanket that threatened to smother me. Then came the sharp, stinging sensation on my cheek, the jarring impact of skin against skin. It took me a moment to register what had happened, to comprehend the unthinkable. My mother, my own mother, had slapped me across the face. The physical pain was sharp, but it paled in comparison to the emotional devastation. The betrayal was complete, the wound irreparable. And then I saw Sarah and Emma's faces. They were actually smiling, their eyes gleaming with a perverse satisfaction. They were enjoying the show, relishing my pain. Richard sat there, a satisfied smirk plastered on his face, as if he'd been waiting for this moment, orchestrating it all along. I touched my cheek, feeling the heat radiating from where her hand had struck. Mom just stood there, her hand still raised, her face a mask of anger and something else. Guilt? Shame? I didn't stick around to find out. I ran to my tiny room, the glorified closet, and started throwing things into my suitcase. Clothes, photos, my few remaining precious possessions that Sarah and Emma hadn't managed to destroy. Tangible proof that I had existed, that I had once belonged. I could hear movement in the house, the muffled sounds of hushed conversation, but no one came to check on me. No one tried to stop me. No one said they were sorry. I made it about a block before the adrenaline wore off, before the full weight of my situation crashed down on me. I was 18 years old, with no money, no plan, and nowhere to go. Alone! My hands were shaking as I pulled out my phone and scrolled through my contacts. There was only one person I could turn to, one compass that still pointed true. Hey, princess. What's up? Dad's cheerful voice on the other end of the line almost broke me. The sheer normalcy of his tone, the unwavering warmth, threatened to shatter my carefully constructed composure. Dad, can you come get me? I managed to choke out, my voice trembling. Please, of course. Where are you? 15 minutes later, a sleek black Mercedes pulled up beside me. For a moment, I thought I'd given him the wrong address. There was no way this was Dad's car. He drove a beat-up old pickup truck, a relic from his struggling days. But there he was, grinning through the open window, his eyes crinkling at the corners. The same familiar smile that had always been my safe haven. Like my new ride? He asked, getting out to help me with my suitcase. I stared at the car in disbelief. This is yours? He laughed, that warm, familiar laugh I'd grown up with. Yep, all mine. Bought it last week. Business has been good. Then he noticed my suitcase, and his expression changed. The laughter faded, replaced by a deep, unwavering concern. Tasha, what's going on? Why are you out here with a suitcase? The whole story came pouring out, a torrent of emotions I could no longer contain. The college acceptances, Richard's mockery, Mom's betrayal, the slap, every detail, every agonizing moment, spilled out in a jumbled, incoherent mess. Dad's face grew darker with each word, his jaw tightening, his fists clenching. By the end, he was gripping the steering wheel so hard his knuckles were white. I'm going over there right now, he growled, starting to turn the car around. No, Dad, please don't, I pleaded, grabbing his arm. It's not worth it. I just want to leave. Just take me away from here. He looked at me for a long moment, his eyes filled with a mixture of anger and pain. Then, slowly, he nodded. You're right, he said, his voice low and dangerous. Let's just go home. Home. The word felt foreign, unfamiliar. But as I sat beside Dad in his sleek new car, leaving the wreckage of my old life behind, I knew I was finally heading in the right direction. Over lunch at his place, he'd learned to cook a pretty decent pasta over the years. Dad dropped another bombshell. Remember that fleet contract I was sitting on with the luxury car rental company? He was trying to act casual, but I could see him practically bouncing with excitement. Well, I got it. Exclusive maintenance contract for their entire fleet. Business is really taking off. I was genuinely happy for him, proud of his hard work and perseverance. But I must have looked a bit dejected, thinking about my own shattered dreams, because he quickly added, "And you know what else?" He stood up, walked over to his desk, and pulled out a thick folder. "I've been saving money for years, Princess, putting aside whatever I could for your college fund." He opened the folder, revealing a stack of bank statements, meticulously organized. The total amount made my head spin. "It's not enough for an Ivy League school, but combined with your scholarships." I nearly choked on my pasta. You've been saving for my college?" He reached across the table and squeezed my hand, his eyes filled with love. "Of course, I have, Princess. Did you really think I'd let Richard be right about me?" For the first time that day, I started crying. But these were happy tears, tears of relief, tears of gratitude, tears of pure, unadulterated love. All those years I'd spent protecting Dad from my problems, trying to shield him from the truth. And here he'd been, quietly planning for my future, working tirelessly to ensure I had a chance to succeed. I decided to keep my college plans a secret from Mom and her perfect family. Let them think they'd won. Let them believe they'd broken me. I spent that summer living with Dad, working at the Sweet Bean Cafe downtown to save up some extra money. It wasn't glamorous, but it was honest work, and it gave me a sense of purpose. Then, one afternoon, the bell above the door chimed, and in walked Sarah and Emma. They were dressed like they were heading to a fashion show, not a coffee shop. Impeccably styled hair, designer clothes, the works, the epitome of entitled privilege. Of course, they settled into a booth in my section. Of course, they did. And, of course, they smirked as I approached with my notepad, trying to maintain a professional demeanor. Well, Sarah drawled, her voice loud enough for nearby customers to hear. "Looks like someone found their true calling." Emma snickered, her eyes sweeping over my uniform with blatant disdain. "Yeah, we just wanted to see how the other half lives before we head off to college in the fall. Dad's already picked out the perfect schools for us," Sarah continued, examining her manicured nails. I took a deep breath, fighting back the urge to explode. "Can I take your order?" "Oh, you'll probably still be taking orders when we graduate," Sarah continued, her voice dripping with condescension. "But don't worry. Maybe we'll leave you nice tips when we visit home from college." I just smiled, a tight, brittle smile that barely reached my eyes. I wrote down their complicated, half-calf, extra hot drink orders, meticulously noting every ridiculous detail. Let them have their moment. Let them bask in their imagined superiority. I knew where I was headed. I knew what I was capable of. If they only knew. That fall, I started college in the neighboring state, a world away from the suffocating atmosphere of my old life. I chose a business program, driven by a desire to prove Richard wrong, to show him that I was more than just a loser's daughter. I threw myself into my studies, devouring information, soaking up knowledge. I joined clubs, attended seminars, networked with other students. I was determined to make the most of this opportunity, to build a future that was entirely my own. I made new friends, genuine connections based on shared interests and mutual respect. People who saw me for who I was, not for who my family was. People who celebrated my successes and supported me through my struggles. Slowly but surely, I started building a life that had nothing to do with my past. A life filled with purpose, ambition, and the quiet satisfaction of knowing I was in control of my own destiny. Mom never called to apologize, not for the slap, not for the years of neglect, not for choosing them over me. I didn't call her either. The silence between us was a gaping chasm, a testament to the irreparable damage that had been done. Dad visited whenever he could, driving for hours just to have dinner with me, to check in, to remind me that I was loved. We talked almost every day, sharing our triumphs and our setbacks, building a bond that was stronger than ever before. 4 years flew by in a blur of late-night study sessions, challenging projects, and exhilarating breakthroughs. I graduated with honors, near the top of my class. I landed a job at a marketing firm in the same city as my college, a small company with a big vision. The starting salary wasn't huge, but it was enough to rent a small apartment, to pay my bills, to live comfortably. It was enough to feel independent, to feel like I was finally standing on my own 2 feet. I worked hard, stayed late, took on extra projects. I was eager to prove myself, to demonstrate my value. My boss noticed. The promotions started coming, first junior manager, then senior manager, then team leader. Each one came with a nice bump in pay, a tangible reward for my hard work. I was able to start saving serious money for the first time in my life. I paid off my student loans, built up an emergency fund, and started thinking about the future. Then, one day, Dad showed up at my apartment with a massive grin on his face. His business had expanded to 3 locations, and he had just signed contracts with 2 more luxury car rental companies. He was practically bursting with pride. "I want you to have this," he said, pulling out a cashier's check from his pocket. The amount written on the check made me dizzy. I stared at it in disbelief, my eyes wide with shock. "What? What is this for?" I stammered. "It's for a down payment on your own place," he said, his eyes twinkling with happiness. "You've worked so hard, princess. You deserve this." 2 months later, I was moving into my own apartment, a small but charming space with exposed brick walls and a view of the city skyline. Not rented, owned, a sanctuary I could call my own. More raises came, more promotions. I continued to excel at my job, pushing myself, taking on new challenges. I started thinking about buying a house, something with a garden, maybe in one of those quiet neighborhoods outside the city. Something permanent. Then, one evening, my phone rang. The caller ID displayed an unknown number. I hesitated for a moment, a sense of foreboding washing over me. I rarely got calls from unknown numbers. I answered it anyway. "Tasha?" The voice on the other end was hesitant, unfamiliar, yet strangely familiar in a way that made my stomach clench. It was Mom. It's Mom," she said, her voice trembling. I think it's time we talked. I want to try to fix things between us." A wave of conflicting emotions washed over me. Anger, resentment, curiosity, a flicker of something akin to hope. I took a deep breath, trying to steady my racing heart. "Okay," I heard myself say. "Let's talk." We agreed to meet at a small cafe downtown, a neutral territory, a place with no shared history, no painful memories. When Mom walked in, I almost didn't recognize her. She looked older, worn down, defeated. Nothing like the confident, impeccably dressed woman who had chosen her new family over me years ago. The light in her eyes was gone, replaced by a haunted, hollow emptiness. "You look wonderful," she said, sliding into the seat across from me, her eyes searching mine. We made awkward small talk, discussing the weather, my job, anything to avoid the elephant in the room. Until the waitress brought our coffee, the aroma filling the air, a faint echo of those Sunday mornings, the apple pie, the cinnamon. Then, Mom took a deep breath, her hands trembling as she reached for her cup. The real story started to unfold. "I left Richard," she said, staring into her coffee, avoiding my gaze. "Or rather, he left me." She paused, her voice cracking with emotion. "After we mortgaged the house to pay for the girls' college." I waited, letting her continue at her own pace. I knew this wasn't going to be easy. "They promised they'd help with the payments once they graduated," she said, a bitter laugh escaping her lips. "But when the time came, they had excuses. Always excuses." She wiped her eyes with a trembling hand. The job market was tough. They needed to focus on their careers. They had their own expenses. The hypocrisy was staggering. After all they'd put me through. After all I'd given up. "We lost the house," she said, her voice barely a whisper. "All those years of payments gone." She paused, swallowing hard. "And Richard, he just packed up and moved in with Sarah. Said he couldn't handle the financial stress anymore." My blood ran cold. She looked up at me, her eyes filled with a desperate plea for understanding. I was wrong, Tasha. I chose them over you. I let them hurt you. I hurt you. And I am so, so sorry. The tears in her eyes were real. The tremor in her voice was real. And despite everything, despite all the years of pain and rejection, I found myself reaching across the table, taking her hand in mine. I forgive you, I said softly, surprising myself with how much I meant it. The next few days, I couldn't stop thinking about our conversation, about Mom, alone and homeless after giving everything to people who had given nothing back. It felt like karma, in a way, but it didn't bring me joy. Instead, I felt a strange mix of sadness, guilt, and a flicker of opportunity, a chance to be the bigger person, a chance to rewrite our story. I wrestled with my emotions, torn between my resentment and my compassion. Could I really forgive her? Could I really move on? On Wednesday evening, I picked up the phone and dialed her number. Hello? Her voice was tentative, laced with apprehension. It's me, I said. Tasha. We exchanged hellos, the silence hanging heavy between us. I've been thinking about buying a house, I said, breaking the silence. Something in the old neighborhood with a garden, maybe. I paused, taking a deep breath. It would be too big for just me, I continued. But maybe you'd like to live there. I took a week off work and flew home to start the house hunt. It felt surreal, driving through the familiar streets, past the old landmarks, the places that held so many painful memories. I spent days scouring listings, visiting properties, searching for the perfect place. Nothing too extravagant, nothing too ostentatious. Just a solid, welcoming space with a good vibe. Finally, I found it. A beautiful old house just outside town, with a wraparound porch, mature trees in the yard, and a sense of quiet serenity. The house was a clean slate, waiting for a new story to be written. When Mom saw it, she burst into tears. Relief, gratitude, disbelief. All those emotions swirled together in her eyes. I hired a contractor to do some minor renovations, painting the walls, replacing the carpets, making the space feel fresh and new. When Dad heard about my decision, I expected him to be angry, to accuse me of being naive, of falling for Mom's manipulations. Instead, he surprised me. You've got a bigger heart than most, Princess, he said, hugging me tight. I'm proud of you. The next few months fell into a pleasant routine. I'd fly in for weekend visits, spend time with Dad first, catching up on his business, his life, our shared history. Then I'd head over to the new house, spending time with Mom, helping her settle in, rebuilding our relationship, piece by fragile piece. She seemed happier, more relaxed, more like the Mom I remembered from childhood. The haunted look in her eyes began to fade, replaced by a glimmer of hope. During one visit, I noticed some unfamiliar things in the house. Men's boots by the door, a jacket I didn't recognize hanging in the hallway. Small things, subtle details that pricked at my senses. Oh, just a friend visiting, Mom said quickly when I asked, her eyes darting away. You know how it is. I didn't think much of it at the time. Maybe she was finally moving on, finding some happiness for herself. Maybe I was projecting my own insecurities, seeing danger where there was none. I should have paid more attention. I should have trusted my instincts. The call came on a Tuesday morning. I was just settling into work, catching up on emails, when my phone lit up with Aunt Carol's number. Aunt Carol had always been Mom's confidant, the one who knew all the family secrets, the one who always told the truth, even when it hurt. I answered the phone, a sense of dread washing over me. Tasha, honey, she said, her voice hesitant, laced with concern. There's something you need to know. It's about your mother. I braced myself, waiting for the blow to fall. Well, Richard's living in the house. My blood ran cold. Him and his daughters. They moved in months ago. I couldn't breathe. That's impossible, I said, my voice barely a whisper. I was just there 2 weeks ago. It was just Mom. Aunt Carol sighed, her voice filled with pity. Because she makes them leave before you visit, honey, she said gently. They clear out every time you're scheduled to come. I closed my eyes, trying to process the information, to make sense of the betrayal. I found out from Maureen next door, Aunt Carol continued. She's been watching them come and go for months now. The pieces started to fall into place. The boots, the jacket, the quick deflection, the unease I'd dismissed as paranoia. I thanked her, hung up the phone, and booked the first flight home. No warning, no calls to Mom, just a swift, decisive action. I worked remotely on the plane. I could work remotely anywhere, even amidst the tornado that was building up inside me. It was Wednesday afternoon when I pulled up to the house in my rental car. Richard's old pickup truck was in the driveway, the same one he'd had all those years ago. The sight of it sent a wave of nausea through me. My key turned smoothly in the lock. The scene that greeted me in the kitchen was a grotesque parody of the past, a horrifying reminder of the years I'd spent trying to escape. Mom was at the stove, wearing her favorite apron, fussing over a pot of something that smelled suspiciously like Richard's favorite beef stew. Sarah and Emma were at the kitchen table, looking exactly like their old, entitled selves, their faces etched with boredom and disdain. Richard was in his usual chair, reading the newspaper, his legs crossed, his face relaxed and smug. Mom saw me first. The wooden spoon she was holding clattered to the floor, echoing through the sudden silence. Tasha? Her face went white, her eyes wide with panic. I wasn't expecting you until Saturday. Clearly, I said, my voice surprisingly steady, considering the chaos raging inside me. What are they doing here? Sarah answered, her voice dripping with saccharine sweetness. We live here now, Emma chimed in, her eyes flashing with a hint of defiance. Mom invited us. She realized family should stick together. Together, family? I said, turning to Mom, my voice rising. What are you even talking about? Mom stepped forward, her hands clasped in front of her, her face pleading. They apologized, Tasha. They're trying to make things right. Richard cleared his throat, a smug smile spreading across his face. I've changed. The girls have changed. Get them out, I said, my voice low and dangerous. Now. This is my house, and I want them gone. Mom straightened up, her chin lifting with a stubborn defiance. I remembered all too well. No, she said firmly. I love them, and I want them here. The words hit me like a physical blow. Love them? I couldn't believe what I was hearing. After everything they did to you? After they cost you your house? Have you forgotten how they treated me? How they bullied me every single day? How they destroyed my things? Stole my room? Made my life hell? That was years ago. Mom waved her hand dismissively. They were just children then. And what about now? I demanded, my voice trembling with rage. They used you for college money and abandoned you. Richard left you when things got tough. How can you just forgive that? Because they're family, Mom insisted, her chin lifting. Sarah and Emma exchanged smug looks, their eyes gleaming with malicious satisfaction. Richard just sat there, silently observing, that same self-satisfied smile plastered on his face. Fine, I said, my voice ice cold. Then I'm giving you a choice, Mom. Right now! Them or me. The silence that followed seemed to stretch into eternity. I watched Mom's face, searching for any sign of the mother I used to know, the one who used to braid my hair and kiss my scraped knees, the one who told me I could be anything I wanted to be. Her eyes flickered between me and Richard, between me and her stepdaughters. Her indecision was a knife twisting in my gut. I wanted to scream, to shake her, to force her to see what she was doing. But I held my ground, forcing myself to remain calm, to maintain control. Finally, she spoke. The words she uttered shattered the last vestiges of hope I held for our relationship. I choose them, she said, her voice barely a whisper. We're happier together, Tasha. Why can't you just accept that? Something inside me hardened, a cold, unyielding resolve taking hold. The last thread of love, of forgiveness, snapped. You have 2 days to get out of my house, I said, my voice devoid of emotion. All of you. You can't do this. Mom's voice rose to a shriek, her eyes wild with panic. I'm your mother. You can't throw me out. Watch me. I turned and walked out, leaving them behind. Their voices, a cacophony of accusations and threats, followed me down the driveway. 2 days later, I returned. The house was exactly as I had left it. Their cars were still in the driveway. The same clutter was scattered throughout the living room. They were all sitting in the living room, lounging as if nothing had changed, as if they belonged there. I told you to leave, I said, standing in the doorway, my arms crossed. Mom actually laughed, a shrill, hysterical sound that sent shivers down my spine. And I told you, you can't throw me out. I'm your mother. I pulled out my phone and dialed 911. Then I'll let the police explain it to you. Richard started to rise from his chair, his face contorted with rage. You wouldn't dare. Hello. Yes. I need assistance removing unauthorized occupants from my property, I stated, my voice clear and steady, maintaining eye contact with Mom the entire time. I am the legal homeowner. My address is. What followed was ugly, a chaotic eruption of long, simmering resentments and unchecked anger. The police arrived within minutes, their presence filling the small house with an oppressive tension. Mom screamed and cried as the officers explained that, yes, I could evict them, and no, she had no legal right to stay. Her pleas and accusations were ignored. Richard turned purple with rage, calling me every name he could think of, spewing insults and threats. His self-control finally snapped, revealing the ugly, vindictive man he had always been. Sarah and Emma joined in, their true colors showing through their designer clothes and fake smiles. The carefully constructed facade of sophistication crumbled, revealing the spoiled, entitled brats they truly were. You ungrateful bitch! Mom shrieked as the police escorted them out, their belongings hastily packed into garbage bags. After everything I've done for you, everything you've done for me, I said, my voice dripping with sarcasm. Name one thing, Mom. Just one thing you've done for me since the day you married him. She had no answer. Her mouth opened and closed, but no words came out. The truth was a gaping void she couldn't fill. Aunt Carol keeps me updated, though I never ask. It's a silent agreement, a way for her to stay connected, to ease her own conscience. They're living in a small, run-down apartment across town, struggling to make rent, barely scraping by. The tables have turned, their lives a pale imitation of the lavish lifestyle they once enjoyed. Richard still can't hold down a job, his volatile temper and inflated ego making him unemployable. He's become a bitter, resentful shell of his former self, a pathetic caricature of the man Mom once idolized. Sarah and Emma never visit, too busy with their own lives to care about the mother who sacrificed everything for them. The promises they made were hollow, empty words spoken to appease her, to extract what they needed. Sometimes Mom calls, late at night, her voice slurred and desperate. She leaves rambling voicemails, filled with regret and self-pity. But I never answer. I can't! The wounds are too deep, the scars too raw. The cost of forgiveness was too high. The house sits empty most of the time, a silent testament to the shattered dreams and broken promises that linger within its walls. I'm thinking about selling it, finally severing all ties to the past. Maybe buying something closer to the city, where I live now. Something smaller, cozier, something that doesn't hold any echoes of the past, any reminders of the family I lost, or the family I never truly had. Sometimes I wonder if I made the right decision, if I should have tried harder to forgive, to rebuild. But then I remember the years of pain, the constant betrayal, the unwavering cruelty, and I know that some wounds are simply too deep to heal. Some bridges are too broken to cross. I did what I had to do to survive, to protect myself, to reclaim my life. The price of forgiveness was too high, and I refused to pay it. Years have passed. I've built a life I'm proud of. My career continues to flourish. I mentor young women, sharing the lessons I learned the hard way. Trust your instincts, stand your ground, and never let anyone dim your light. I found love too. A kind, intelligent man named David, who accepts me for who I am, flaws and all. He knows my story, the scars I carry, and he loves me anyway. He doesn't try to fix me, or change me, or tell me how I should feel. He simply holds my hand and walks beside me. A true partner, a genuine friend. We talk about the future, about building a family, creating our own traditions, defining our own meaning of home. A home filled with love, respect, and unwavering support. A home where forgiveness is earned, not demanded. I still think about Mom sometimes, about the choices she made, the path she chose. I wonder if she ever regrets her decision, if she ever looks back and sees the daughter she lost, the life she destroyed. But I can't dwell on the past. I can't let her choices define me. I have to keep moving forward, building my own future, creating my own happiness. I am not my mother's daughter. I am Tasha, and I am finally free.